Hello. Am I audible?
Hi, Jayanti.
Am I audible?
It's coming and going. And now your picture is frozen. Yeah. Now I can see you properly and you're moving. Otherwise, the picture was frozen earlier.
Now it's better?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start. Okay, welcome to yet another session of this beautiful autobiography by Swami Kriyananda. Before we start, as always, let's start with a prayer, bringing our hands in front of our hearts, gazing up, closing your eyes, gazing up at the point between the eyebrows. Let's offer our gratitude and invoke the presence of God and Gurus here with us as we dive deep into the scripture. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, friend, beloved God, great masters of Kriya Yoga, Jesus Christ, Bhagwan Krishna, Mahavatar Babaji, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswarji, beloved Gurudev, Paramhansa Yogananda Ji, saints and sages of all religions, dear friend and guide, Swami Kriyananda. O great ones, be with us here today. Help us to tune into thy consciousness, thy will, thy joy, thy bliss. May we always live this life tuned into thy divine will. We are thine, be thou eternally ours. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Let's chant together. Just for a few moments, closing our eyes, gazing up at the point between the eyebrows, calling out to the Guru, always tuning into the Guru. Feeling his presence, his smile, his response at the heart center. Always tuning into his guidance. Bringing that energy of devotion, love for Guru from the heart center up towards the spiritual eye, offering it at the feet of the divine, the Guru. Visualize the lotus feet of the Guru at the spiritual eye. Offer this devotional energy at his feet in surrender, that he may always guide our lives, that we always live our lives according to his wish, his will, his guidance. Om Shanti Shanti. So, in all these previous chapters, we saw the struggle that Swami Kriyananda was going through, Donald Walter, because he realized he didn't really belong to the even though everything was just fine in his life, he had a wonderful family, he had everything going for him, yet there was always this vacuum. There was something that he always felt was missing, and slowly through various some introspection and other ways, he finally realized what was that missing factor was God. So he knew he had to find God. And how did he come to that realization? That one day he said that, if I'm conscious, then God must be consciousness. So he needs to find God. But he didn't know how to do it. He knew that you need to meditate, but he didn't know how to meditate. He didn't know what really he was seeking, even though he knew that the concept of God was there. But he was not aware where, how, who will guide him. And in all this, he had this intense yearning to find God. And in that, when the soul is ready, when the disciple is ready, the Guru appears, as the Indian scriptures say. So now we come to the chapter where it is not by chance that he sees the autobiography of a yogi, but we will discuss that later. Let us listen to Swami Kriyananda reading this chapter.
Chapter 15, A Map Discovered. As soon as possible after my return to White Plains, I went to Bowling Green in New York City to apply for a merchant mariner's card. I received the card on August 24th with the classification Ordinary Seaman, Messman, Wiper. I was told it was now only a question of waiting for a ship that would give me a berth. I hoped to ship out as soon as possible. Meanwhile, I helped Mother to pack. On her sailing date, I accompanied her to the dock in New York and saw her safely off on her journey. Next, I went down to Bowling Green to see if any ship had come in. No luck. Come back in a few days. With most of the afternoon still before me, I went uptown to browse at Brentano's, a famous bookstore on Fifth Avenue. At Brentano's I got into a discussion on spiritual matters with a sales clerk, who showed me a few books by Thomas Merton, the young Protestant Christian who had converted to Roman Catholicism and had then become a Trappist monk. I was intrigued, though I didn't feel personally attracted. It was the Catholicity, which is to say, the universality of India's teachings, that had won my devotion. From Brentano's I went further up Fifth Avenue to another bookstore, Doubleday Durand, as it was named then. Here I found an entire section of books on Indian philosophy, the first I had ever encountered. Hungrily I feasted my gaze on the wide variety of titles, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, books on yoga. I finished scanning these shelves, then stood up to go over them again. This time, to my surprise, the first book I saw, standing face outward on the shelf, was one I hadn't noticed at first. The author's photograph on the cover affected me strangely. Never had I seen any face radiate back to me so much goodness, humility, and love. Eagerly I picked up the book and glanced again at its title, Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. The author I saw lived in America, in California. Was this someone at last who could help me in my search? As I leafed through the first pages of the book, the first words to catch my attention were dedicated to the memory of Luther Burbank, an American saint. An American saint? But how preposterous! How could anyone become a saint in this land of the almighty dollar, this materialistic desert, this... I closed the book in dismay and returned it to its place on the shelf. That day I bought my first book of Indian philosophy, not Autobiography of a Yogi, but Sir Edwin Arnold's beautiful translation of the Bhagavad Gita. Eagerly I took this treasure home with me to Scarsdale, where I had temporarily rented a private room. For the next couple of days I fairly devoured what I read, feeling myself to be soaring through vast skies of wisdom. By this sign is the sage known, being of equal grace to comrades, friends, chance-comers, strangers, lovers, enemies, aliens and kinsmen, loving all alike, evil or good. What wonderful words! Thrilled I read on. Yea, knowing me the source of all, by me all creatures wrought, the wise in spirit cleave to me, into my being brought, and unto these thus serving well, thus loving ceaselessly, I give a mind of perfect mood, whereby they draw to me, and, all for love of them, within their darkened souls I dwell, and with bright rays of wisdom's lamp their ignorance dispel. These marvelous teachings were dispelling all my doubts. I knew now with complete certainty that this was the right path for me. The day after I finished my first reading of the Bhagavad Gita, I returned to New York, intending to visit Bowling Green and see if any ship had come in. I was walking down 7th Avenue toward the subway, the entrance to which was on the far side of the next cross street, when I recalled the book I'd rejected so summarily on my last visit to the city, Autobiography of a Yogi. As I remembered that beautiful face on the cover, I felt a strong inner prompting to go buy it. I thrust the thought firmly out of my mind. That isn't what I'm looking for, I told myself. Chuckling, I added, an American saint indeed. Resolutely, I continued to walk toward the subway. The thought returned, how can you know what the book is really like if you won't even read it? No, I repeated. I then offered reasons. I've got to stop reading books. I'm too intellectual as it is. Besides, if I'm ever to become a hermit, I'm going to have to save money, not continue to spend it. I reached the corner and was proceeding toward the curb ahead of me when I felt that an actual force was turning me left. toward Fifth Avenue. I'd never experienced anything like this before. Amazed, I asked myself, is there something in this book that I'm meant to read? Unresisting now, I hastened forward, eager to reach Doubleday Duran. On entering the store, I made straight for the shelves of Indian books and bought Autobiography of a Yogi. As I turned to leave, I bumped into Doug Birch, that friend from Scarsdale High School who had introduced me to Nick's and to Dixieland Jazz. We exchanged news briefly. Doug began to describe in glowing terms his plans for a career in radio and advertising. The more he talked, the more closely I hugged to my heart this increasingly precious acquisition. Imperceptibly, my doubts about it had vanished. I felt as though Yogananda shared my dismay at the shining prospects Doug was describing, a way of life that to me spelled desolation. My new book in hand, I felt suddenly as though this Indian yogi and I were old friends. The world and I were strangers, but here was one human being, the very first, who knew and understood me, and I hadn't yet even met him physically. I waited until I'd reached my room in Scarsdale before opening the book, and then began the most thrilling literary adventure of my life. Autobiography of a Yogi is the story of a young Bengali Indian's intense search for God. It describes a number of living saints he met on his journey, especially his own great guru, Swami Sri Yukteswar. It also describes more clearly than any other mystical work I have ever read since the author's experiences with God, including the highest one possible, samadhi, mystical union. In chapter after chapter, I found moving testimony to God's living reality, not only in infinity, but in the hearts and lives of living human beings. I read of how Yogananda's prayers, even for little things, had been answered, and of how, by placing himself unreservedly in God's hands, his unanticipated needs had been met unfailingly. I read of intense love for God, such as I myself yearned to possess, of a relationship with him more intimate, more dear than I had dared to imagine possible. Until now, I had supposed that a life of meditation might give me, at best, a little peace of mind. But here I discovered all at once that the fruit of the spiritual life is a love and bliss, quote, beyond imagination of expectancy, end quote. Until recently I had doubted the value of prayer, except perhaps as a means of uplifting one's self. But now I learned and could not for a moment doubt that God relates individually, lovingly, to each and every seeker. Miracles abound in this book. Many of them, I confess, were quite beyond my powers of acceptance at the time. Instead of dismissing them, however, as I would certainly have done had I read about them in almost any other book, I suspended my incredulity. For the spirit of this story was so deeply honest, so transparently innocent of pride or impure motive, that it was impossible for me to doubt that its author believed implicitly every word he wrote. Never before had I encountered a spirit so clearly truthful, so filled with goodness and joy. Every page seemed radiant with light. As I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I alternated between tears and laughter, tears of pure joy, laughter of even greater joy. For 3 days I scarcely ate or slept. When I walked, it was almost a tiptoe, as if in an ecstatic dream. What this book described, finally, was the highest of sciences, Kriya Yoga, a technique that enables the seeker to advance rapidly on the path of meditation. I, who wanted so desperately to learn how to meditate, felt all the excitement of one who has found a treasure map. The treasure in this case being a divine one, buried deep within my own being. Autobiography of a Yogi remains the greatest book I have ever read. One perusal of it was enough to change my whole life. From that time on, my break with the past was complete. I resolved in the smallest detail to follow Paramahansa Yogananda's teaching. Finding that he recommended a vegetarian diet, I immediately renounced meat, fish, and fowl. He could have recommended a diet of bread and water, and I'd have adopted that diet without a qualm. For more than anything else, what this book gave me was the conviction that in Yogananda I had found my guru, my spiritual teacher for all time to come. Only a few days earlier, I hadn't even known this strange word guru. I hadn't known anything about yoga or reincarnation or karma or almost any of the basic precepts and terminology of Indian philosophy. Now, incredibly, I felt such deep and utter trust in another human being that, ignorant of his philosophy though I was willing to follow him to the end of life. And while I had yet to meet him, I felt as I had on seeing his face on the cover of the book, that he was the truest friend I had ever known. The day after becoming a vegetarian, I was invited by friends of my family, Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd Gibson, to lunch at their home. To my combined amusement and dismay, the main dish consisted of chicken a la king. Not wanting to hurt my friends' feelings, I compromised by pushing the chicken bits to one side and eating the vegetables in their chicken sauce. George Calvert, on whose father's farm Bob and I had worked after my graduation from high school, had invited me the following day to lunch at his parents' home and to a polo game afterwards. This time I had no choice but to refuse the thick, juicy hamburger sandwich that his mother offered me. To make matters still more awkward, George had considerately provided me with a date. I must have seemed strange company indeed, eating hardly anything and paying as little attention to the girl as politely possible from the opposite end of the room. Yogananda was a monk, I too would be a monk. The polo game gave me an opportunity for a little surreptitious meditation, so I didn't view the game as a total loss. Later that day I met my brother Bob and Dean Bassett, a friend of ours, at Nielsen's, an ice cream parlor in Scarsdale Village. Dean had been voted the biggest wolf in my senior high school class. He and Bob were discussing Dean's favorite subject, girls. I listened in silence for a time. At last I protested, "Don't you see? Desire only enslaves one to the very things he desires." Bob and Dean gazed at each other quizzically. "What's wrong with him?" Dean asked. It was years before I realized that comprehension, like a flower, must unfold at its own pace. Until a person is ready to embrace a truth, even the clearest logic will not make it acceptable to him. As soon as I finished reading Autobiography of a Yogi, my impulse was to jump onto the next California-bound bus. But I didn't want to be impulsive, so I waited a whole day. I even debated for several hours whether it might not be wiser for me to go to sea, as I'd first planned, and there meditate a few months before making such an important decision. But, of course, I knew already that it was the right decision. The following day I packed my bag and took an early train into New York City. My godfather, Dr. Winthrop Haynes, had been sympathetically concerned for my future. He and his wife were like second parents to me. I didn't feel I could leave New York without bidding him farewell. On my way to the bus station, therefore, I stopped by his office at Rockefeller Center. Finding him out of his office, I left a note on his desk with the message, "I'm going to California to join a group of people who I believe can teach me what I want to know about God and about religion." This was the first intimation I had given anyone that God was my true goal in life. I took the next available westbound bus. Thereafter, for 4 days and 4 nights, my home was a succession of long-distance buses. My break with the past was so sudden, so complete, that I sometimes ask myself whether some very special grace had not been needed to make it possible. I wonder what I would have done, for example, if Mother had still been in America. Would I have had the courage to take such a drastic step? Who knows? She would almost surely have opposed my directions, unprecedented as they were. After all, what did I know of the Indian teachings? Nothing. And here I was planning to devote my entire life to them. Had Mother been there, would she have succeeded in deflecting me from my purpose? The question has become academic, but even so, wasn't it remarkable that it was the very day I put Mother on her ship to Cairo that I discovered the book that was to change my life? Strange indeed are God's ways. I was to see much of them in the years that followed. Never have they ceased to make me marvel.
What a beautiful story. Just for a moment, close your eyes. Uh, just sit up straight, closing your eyes, gazing up at the point between the eyebrows, and visualize this young J. Donald Walters, a 22-year-old young guy who is kind of, still puzzled, wondering where his life is going to take. He's just about to take a ship so that he can earn some money and also so that he can become a hermit and also meditate, maybe, though he doesn't know how to meditate. And just visualize him walking down this street, Fifth Avenue, where he goes to one bookshop and then the next. And then he sees this section on Indian philosophies. Visualize that scene. It's a beautiful thought, even to watch this happening. He's seeing all the other books on Indian philosophy. And then he stood up to go over again. I mean, he had finished scanning these shelves, then stood up to go over again. And he says, this time, to my surprise, the first book I saw standing face outward on the shelf was one I hadn't noticed at first. Visualize that book, Autobiography of a Yogi. The author's photograph on the cover, he says, affected me strangely. Never had I seen any face radiate back to me so much goodness, humility, and love. Visualize Master's picture on that book, looking back at us. It's radiating his love, his divine love, humility, goodness. Visualize the first time you picked up that book, maybe as a student in level 1 when you were asked to read, or you read the book and you came. It so moved you that you came looking for a course in Kriya Yoga. What did it do to you? How did you feel? Bring that feeling of awe, of that complete trust in the Master, complete faith as he is looking at, and we look back at him. Gently open your eyes. It's good to, we right now we are all reading autobiography again, every day one chapter. it's good to go back to that time when we heard about him for the first time, when we read about him for the first time, when we read autobiography for the first time. Think back, what did it do to you? I mean, if we are all here, even today, something shifted in each one of us. And that is exactly what Swamiji is talking about. But first time when he picks up and he says, dedicated to the memory of Luther Burbank, an American saint, he says, that's just not possible. He keeps it back. And then, goes away. He picks up another book, reads that. Then he says, and the last he says is the day he had put his mother on the ship so she can join her husband in Egypt. And he's walking back on that road in the 5th Avenue. He actually is on the 7th Avenue, where he says, I recall that book. And again, he says, no, and he gives all kinds of reasons why he will not pick up that book, because I need money. I'm going to be a hermit. I'm spending a lot of time reading books. And again, he says, chuckling, he says, an American saint indeed. So preconceived notions, right? For him, America and a saint, they didn't go together. So he just put the book back because it didn't match his his thought of what America is all about. And then he says, I reached the corner and was proceeding towards the curb ahead of me when I felt that an actual force was turning me left towards the 5th Avenue. This is something very similar what Master also said, right? When he was in autobiography, he mentions that he had gone on a very mundane task of picking up vegetables for the Mahamandal where he was staying, the ashram, and where he just, something makes him look in a direction of a street, and in the end of that street, he sees this very royal looking saint kind of person in a ochre dress, who is standing there, and both of them stare at each other, and he says, this is the face I have seen in many dreams. This vision, it has come in his vision, and yet he walks away. He says, probably I'm just adding too much to it. He walks away, and after 10 minutes he says, when I tried to walk forward, my feet felt heavy. When I turned back, it felt light. And he experimented this a few times when the guy accompanying him started laughing. He said, what's wrong with you? Are you nuts? But something similar happened, that when he would look away, try to walk away, his feet felt heavy. When he turned back, it felt light. There was something that was at work. And similarly for Swamiji, he says, he felt an actual force that was turning him left towards 5th Avenue. He says, I had never experienced anything like this before. Is there something in this book that I'm meant to read? Unresisting now, I hasten forward, eager to reach Doubleday, Durham. So he picks up that book, and interestingly, he meets this friend who is very materialistic, very happy that his career is about to take off. He's going to marry this girl and settle down in such a place. And these audio is on. Okay. I mean, he's just picked up this book. He's seen this face, and he says, the more that he talked, the more closely I hugged to my heart this increasingly precious acquisition. Something about that face, the person, or that book was, kind of awakening in him a past memory, of course, because he doesn't know who's Yogananda. He doesn't even probably even know the name of the author at that time. He had just seen his face. And already he's holding it as a shield against this person, this very materialistic wave that was coming towards him. He says, imperceptibly, my doubts about the book had vanished. He said, I felt as though Yogananda shared my dismay at the shining prospects dog was describing, a way of life that may, to me, spelled desolation. So he says, my new book in hand, I felt suddenly as though this Indian yogi and I were old friends. So true it was. I mean, the Indian scriptures say that, when God creates the universe and, sends out the souls in that journey to come back finally, it's like a, game, it's a lila, right? He also assigns a guru to each of that soul. The guru travels with us in all our millions of incarnations that we must have gone through and come to this point. He has been watching over us. He has been, but God and Guru have given us the free will to choose or reject, right? So they will not impose God will or Guru. I mean, we can interchange and say God or Guru. They're not going to impose themselves on us till we are ready to accept the guidance of the Guru. Till then, they wait. They have waited for millions of incarnations. They can wait for eons more. But do we really want so many incarnations more to go by? So, as he says, that this Indian yogi and I were old friends, the world and I were strangers. But here was one human being, the very first, who knew and understood me. I mean, this is such a goosebumpy statement. And I hadn't yet even met him physically. But he knew deep down in his heart, in his soul, he knew that here was one soul, one human being. At that time, Master was in body. But for us, all of us who have come much later after Master had left the body, this still is true. It is not like if they have left the physical body, he ceases to exist. In fact, we all are. I mean, there is one story where there was this monk in Mount Washington with Master, and Master had taken Mahasamadhi, and he kind of felt very lost. And he heard of this Indian saint who was to come to Switzerland, I think, and he was there. He went to that saint and said that, please be I want to be your disciple. And that Indian saint said, no, you have a guru. Yogananda is your guru. He said, yeah, but he is dead. And the saint said, no, Yogananda is not dead. You are dead. We are dead. We are dead to that immense reality that we are, right? We are kind of hypnotized in this world, in this Maya, thinking that this is what we are. Whereas the masters, the self-realized masters, the Yogananda was an avatar. They are as alive in this moment, every moment. They are very much, they are part of this whole divine consciousness, right? They just merge back into that divine consciousness. So this statement is as true to us that as it was even when Master was in body. So he says that one human being who knew and understood me, and I hadn't yet even met him. And so he starts reading the whole night. He sits through it. He talks about the important points, and we would have experienced these things and probably more. I mean, you can just sit and contemplate on this book. What else kind of captured your attention? Here he says, in chapter after chapter, I found moving testimony of God's living reality. I mean, he was, when he was seeking through all the churches, I mean, he said, they wouldn't even talk about the word God is also never used. It is all about the organization, and they would kind of stop you if you were to seek anything more. And here it was like where he says it's God's living reality, not only in infinity, but in the hearts and lives of living human beings. I read how Yogananda's prayers, even for little things, had been answered, and how prayers getting answered, God being every day, every moment, God is part of people's lives who he had mentioned in Autobiography of a Yogi. And then he talks about how by the faith, complete faith, by placing himself unreservedly in God's hand, his unanticipated needs had been met unfailingly. We remember the story of two penniless boys where the Master's elder brother had put them through, young little boys, 12-year-olds were put on the train with one-way ticket, and he gives conditions that you will not beg, you will not tell anyone the story, yet you have to go, you should be fed, you have to go looking, see the whole place and come back. And while Master's friend, the companion Jitendra, is very jittery, Master was unshakable in his faith. He knew that, he will be taken care of. And how? They had royal meals, somebody takes them round, somebody hands over money in their hand. Stories upon stories. And then he says, I read of intense love for God, such as I myself yearn to possess, of a relationship with him, more intimate, more dear than I had dared to imagine possible. Nobody told him this, right? He was hoping, somewhere he knew that he had to find God, but he didn't know what does that mean even. And here he was, as he was reading it, it's possible to have a relationship with God. And he says that it is more dear, as Master said, is more dear than your own thoughts, right? Until now, I had supposed that a life of meditation might give me at best a little peace of mind. But here I discovered all at once that the fruit of the spiritual life is a love and bliss beyond imagination of expectancy, as Master said had written in the poem Samadhi, right? And he's talking about, he says, I had doubted the value, until recently, I had doubted the value of prayer, except perhaps as a means of uplifting oneself. Now I learned and could not for a moment doubt that God relates individually, lovingly to each and every seeker. So it is not God as an impersonal. So God we have, when we talk about God's love, it is impersonal, and yet he relates to each one of us in a very personal way, right? So this book opens up the possibility of answered prayers. It is not like by chance that some prayers get answered and some don't. When you have absolute faith and you love God, what Master was trying to tell was, if you have absolute faith and you love God, then even when we saw he has his exams and he's like, what do I do now? And he just chances about this paper, it's the Sanskrit verse, he just learns it, and that is what comes. His every little prayer is answered. It's like God is actually holding his hand and walking with him. And it is not, and later on, what he's saying, let me just go through it. Miracles abound in this book, where he says that he is an American boy who is grown up to very dry form of religion. And here, 8th page, later on he talks about it, that 8th page, in one of the talks, Swamiji says, I open, a very intellectual guy, and opens this book, 8th page, Lahiri Mahashaya, just appears in a field and then disappears. He says, I had to keep it on the shelf because he trusted. There was an intrinsic trust for this author, though he didn't know him, who he was, yet here also he says that for me, there was no to doubt that its author believed implicitly every word. So it was impossible for him to doubt. Everything that was written, he says, I just believed him. And so what he could only do was keep it on a shelf, that he will revisit it at some point, because at that moment it didn't make sense to him that some man can just appear and disappear. So there were so many miracles, and we also, all of us have read the book, there's so many miracles there. And he says, I kept keeping a lot of things on the shelf. So he says every page seemed radiant with light. Okay, we will go there when we go there, where Swamiji meets him and says this, that it is life transforming. And Master said, it is because it has my vibration. It's a very good takeaway for us, that autobiography of a yogi. He says every page seemed radiant with light, and we all know it's because Guru has written this. He has imbibed every word with his vibration. So it is a takeaway for us that, through the week, let us watch the kind of books we read, the kind of music we listen to, the kind of social media, movie, TV channels, or movies, or whatever it is that we are normally exposed to. Just watch, just be aware, because as Master always used to say, awareness precedes control. Be aware. Is it filled with light or filled with the vibrations of this world? Very, very materialistic vibrations. So he says, as I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I alternated between tears and laughter. Tears of pure joy, laughter of even greater joy. Joy. This whole book is all about joy, right? And so, also he says this book described finally what was described finally was the highest of sciences, the Kriya Yoga, a technique that enables the seeker to advance rapidly on the path of meditation. It says, I, who wanted so desperately to learn how to meditate, felt all the excitement of one who has found a treasure map. What is the treasure, he says? A treasure, in this case, being a divine one, buried deep within my own being. Where is the treasure? It's not out anywhere to seek. It's deep within each one of us. We have the treasure. It's like the musk, the deer, musk deer, where Master has often quoted this story where a musk deer, when it comes of age, the musk is in its navel, behind its navel, and the smell starts coming, and it's such a beautiful, overpowering, that it starts looking out. Where is this smell coming from? It runs all over the jungle looking for it. It can't. Then finally jumps down the cliff, thinking probably it's coming from there. It falls to its death, and then the hunter comes, picks up the musks and takes away. This is exactly what we all are also doing. The joy is within, the treasure is within, and we are all seeking happiness, the very transient happiness out in this world, which is never going to, at best, as Master said, at best it is going to disappoint. And so he says, treasure map. And very important point about this book, Autobiography of a Yogi, where Master talks about what is God and his own relation. How he found God and his intense love, and how his prayers were answered. But more importantly, he gave a key, a technique, which said, this book is not about how great Yogananda is. It is about how each one of us has the capability to be a master. The treasure is within. We can all become a master using the key, which is Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga, faith, love for God. These are the keys, the techniques that will take us there. So he didn't write this book. This book wasn't just about him. It was about how each one of us can be this, right? So that is what was really, because this is what Swami was seeking. He wanted to meditate. He didn't know how to meditate. Now here was somebody who said, who can tell him how to do it, right? Who can guide him? So he says, when I read it, my break with the past was complete. Just in that moment, all his seeking and the ache, and it just went away. He knew where he was headed, and this is the way. So he says that, if the master is vegetarian, I'm going to be vegetarian. He was a monk, I'm going to be a monk. And his yearning for God was so intense that he was ready to do anything that this author, whom he had not even met, and who he just said, I didn't even know what a guru meant, and I was ready to become his disciple. This is the attitude that is needed. A complete faith in the master, in the guru, and then doing what he is wanting to in some way, to even imitate him, to emulate him, till we become our own master. It's good to you have a standard, a pole star to follow, and then you just go right ahead. And if you see, when we read about the moment he decided, I will become a vegetarian, he is tested. Maya is throwing at him. He is immediately invited to a dinner where the food is only chicken. he is invited by his friend, and who's again, there's food is chicken, and then he's also got a date for him. Maya is watching each one of us. She'll keep testing us. She'll keep this path is not easy, right? I mean, to stay the path, it's easy to come into the path, but to stay the path, we have to be very watchful. So immediately Maya started throwing things at him, which can, take him off the path. Okay, whoa, nice, autobiography was good, but how can I know? So okay, beautiful, go with that. So it was very important, the attitude that he decided this is how it is. He he pushed his way through that, and when he met his internet connection is unstable. Okay. I hope I'm audible. Met his brother friend, and when they are only talking girls, and he's saying, don't you see, desire only enslaves one of the very things he desires. And they are like looking at him like, what's it? And very important, he says, it was years before I realized that comprehension, like a flower, must unfold at its own pace. Until a person is ready to embrace a truth, even the clearest logic will not make it acceptable to him. So it is all there, staring at each one of us. That this world is will only give us suffering. We need to get away. But unless and until we are ready, we will not even see it. We will even if somebody so initially Swamiji was trying, because he had realized, oh, this is such a, this kind of life is such a waste, I should go, and he found a treasure, he found autobiography, he wants to share it with everyone, saying, look, don't waste your time, what is going to happen, this. But they are not ready to see. How much ever they'll say, what's wrong with him? So it's best, he says, it took me years to realize that comprehension will come at its own pace. Each one of us have, because of our karma or whatever, have our own pace by which we will reach there. There's no point forcing anyone into this. Yet it's always good to keep inspiring through our own example, through the life that we are living. Yet we can't force convert anyone. So he says, as soon as he starts going towards he says, okay, he decides that I'll go to California, where the guru is. And he says, he took the bus. He says, my break with the past was so sudden, so complete, that I sometimes ask myself whether some very special grace had not been needed to make it possible. Yeah. He says, what if his mother had not gone to Egypt? Would he have made this? Because he had put her on the ship and was, just free. So he just walked. Situations are created. Like we read in Autobiography of a Yogi, where when the time was right for Lahiri Mahashaya, the telegram appears where he's transferred to Rani, and he's generally going around walking, and he hears somebody calling his name. He goes there and he meets Babaji and says, oh, I have to go back. People will be wondering where I am. And that is when Babaji says, the office was brought to you and not you to the office. So when Lahiri Mahashaya was, ready, situations were created that the Guru reveals himself. So similarly for him, the mother had to go away. Because as he is saying that she would almost surely have opposed my directions, unprecedented as they were. After all, what did I know of the Indian teachings? Nothing. As a mother, she would have said, what is this you're doing? We don't even know who he is. What are these Indian teachings? And you're saying you are going to throw your life, just following this your entire life. So she wouldn't have allowed. So a situation was created where she is put on the ship and he is free. And then he's kind of forced into this shop back to pick up that book. And he says, strange indeed are God's ways. I was to see much of them in the years that followed. Never have they ceased to make me marvel. Again, just think of any that situation. Why did you come on that path? These are very special things because if you think back, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? Probably this incarnation, we are here to be disciples of Yogananda, to be Kriya, yogis, to accelerate our journey. So that is what else? Apart from that, all the other worldly duties that we are doing are just that, karmic duties that we are bound to do. But this is the main purpose why we are here. So just, think back and how you came on this path. What brought you here? That any situation that, sometimes people say when they are going through some intense trouble is when they switch towards looking for an answer and then come to this path. And then looking back after few years, you look back and say probably that is the reason that situation was created, so I can come here. So all of us have our own stories why we are here. And it's probably a good way to just go back, revisit that time, and be grateful that we are here. We are here today. That Master, we magnetized. He has always been with us, following us, taking care of us. But we, in this lifetime, managed to magnetize him, to make his presence felt, and to take charge, as if all of us in this here today are his disciples. So we have accepted him as guru and have handed over our lives, surrendered the key to this lifetime, and probably all lifetimes, if any that are left, that he takes charge. So it is a blessing to each one of us, and there's so much of gratitude that we all need to be feeling today and always. So with that, I think our chapter today is done. We will meet next week for chapter 16. And it just gets more interesting. And many of us have seen the movie Answer, where, this is dramatized, his meeting with Master and all that. So in case you haven't seen it, probably it's a good time to, one of these days, we can meet at the center again and watch. Any thoughts anybody wants to share, or we can close today's session? Thank you. Thank you for joining.